I didn't mention anything, I don't think.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So we're going to finish. I'm going to just go back a little bit to John 12, and then we're going to move on to John 13. As y'all know, we're moving into the Passion Week, right? Actually, the couple of days of Jesus' death, burial, resurrection. Chapter 12, verse 44 through 50. This was, I told you, some commentators believe this is kind of just a summary John has given us of Jesus' words. But it says, Jesus shouted to the crowds, "If you trust me, you are trusting not only me, but also God who sent me. For when you see me, you are seeing the one who sent me. I will not judge those who hear me, but don't obey me. For I have come to save the world and not to judge it." Now we're going to talk about that. He is going to be judged. But at this time, he didn't come to judge. He come to save. It says, "But all who reject me and my message will be judged on the day of judgment by the truth I have spoken." So what's going to judge is literally his words that he's spoken. "I don't speak on my own authority. The Father who sent me has commanded me what to say and how to say it. And I know his commands lead to eternal life. So I say whatever the Father tells me to say." One of the books I was reading was talking about, there's a cliche in movies, right? Where there's the final showdown between the arch enemies, good versus evil, right? Cowboys and Indians. You can do it in all the movies, right? We were talking about this yesterday. You know, every Disney movie is good versus evil. Like, there's always this theme that plays out. We know how it should end, right? Good should triumph. But we don't always know how it's going to get there, right? Because sometimes it looks like evil is winning, right? Can we be real? In the movie, in real life. And so this is the greatest story ever told. There's actually a movie about Jesus called that, right? The greatest story ever told. Right. And this is the moment. Because the real villain in the story, listen, it's not Pilate. It's not Caesar. It's not Rome. The real villain it's not the Jews. It's not, right? Those aren't the villain. The real villain in the story is darkness. It's evil. It's Satan. And we're about to be introduced to him. John has not mentioned Satan specifically in all 12 chapters. He is in chapter 13 going to mention Satan, and he's going to say that Satan does what? He enters into Judas. Okay? And so we're at that showdown, right? It says in John chapter 13, John will tell us the darkness is Satan, and that he enters Judas, and Judas goes out into the darkness, into the night, right? To do what? To betray Jesus. I wrote these really small, so you're going to have to give me a minute. It says, this moment at the end of chapter 12 gives the challenge that Jesus has been presenting over and over to the people. What? The light has come, right? He's calling himself the light. I'm the light of the world. That we've studied all of this, right? The light has come, shining in the darkness, and the darkness has not what? It's not overcome it, right? The darkness can't overcome the light. The light has been with them, inviting them to make the light their own and to walk in it. He says, listen, walk in the light so you don't stumble, right? Because if you walk around in the dark, what are you going to do? You're going to stumble. You're going to fall. Jesus himself is the light of the world. Listen, he's the one who opens blinded eyes, literally and spiritually, right? He literally opened blinded eyes. He's trying to open their spiritual eyes. The source of light is who? It's God. Jesus is the Son of God, right? They're one. So the source of the light is God, and there's enough light for the whole world. We're going to hear, and right, for God so loved the world that he gave. John, we studied that in John chapter 3. And so the source of light is God. There's enough light for the whole world. But listen, not everybody wants to see. We've talked about this. We've discussed this. It basically says they like their darkness. They like their sin, right? They choose it. And for those who choose to remain in the darkness, Jesus is issuing them a new challenge and a new warning, okay? He's saying, look, I didn't come this time to judge. I come to save. And my words are what are going to save you, right? If you'll believe my words. But if you choose not to believe, there will be judgment, okay? And so he's issuing this challenge. He's issuing this warning that he hasn't come to judge the world. He's come to save it. He has come because God loved the world so much, right, that he sent his only son, the Word made flesh, so that he could save the world in person. That was and is what Jesus is all about. He's about salvation, right? He's about saving the world. And so how many of you know if the light shines brighter than ever before, right? So the light is shining the brightest that it's ever shone. Why? Because Jesus came in flesh. The Word became flesh, right? And dwelt among them. And so when the light is shining brighter than it ever has, even when it comes with the aim of rescuing and healing people, of loving people back to life, that means when people choose darkness, their choice becomes all the more obvious, right? Because if you're all in a little bit of darkness or you're in some gray area and somebody chooses darkness, it's not as obvious. But if the light is shining really, really bright and I choose darkness, I'm going to have to go, right? I'm going to have to leave the light or not come to the light and choose to stay in the darkness. And so the result becomes clear. When Jesus speaks his words of love, the words of God, the words that would heal the world, people who reject those words will find themselves confronted in the end. He says, not really by me, but by the words that I have spoken, the words that you have heard. Listen, I've heard it preached, and you probably have too. If people go to hell and they choose to go there, I think they're going to remember every sermon they ever heard. Right. They're going to remember every person who ever witnessed to them. Yeah. They're going to remember every prayer that they heard prayed for them, right? It's the words of Jesus that they're rejecting, and the words are what are going to judge them, right? Listen, they can't pretend they didn't hear it, right? And so the words, he says, the words themselves will be the judge. They will rise up and condemn them, right? And so the words will have this power. Why? Why do these words have power? Because Jesus said, I don't say anything the Father didn't tell me to say. And so everything that I'm saying is what God himself has instructed me to say. And so here in this final confrontation, before Jesus withdraws again to be with his disciples for his final evening, he says one more time, I'm speaking the words that God gave me. And if you believe me, you're believing in God, right? If you've seen me, you've seen the Father. People who look at him and see who he truly is are looking at the true reflection of God. When they look at him, they're seeing God. And so listen, for years, since then until now, people have doubted and questioned the claims that Jesus made, right? They still doubt that. They still doubting his claims. Is Jesus really the mouthpiece of the living God? That's something we have to settle for ourselves, right? Was he really speaking for God? Did seeing Jesus really mean seeing the Father, right? If we see Jesus, have we really seen God, right? And then does hearing his words and not believing them really mean that those words will return to judge me at the end, right? And so we would all do well to ponder those questions, to reflect on our response to those questions, right? We often hear sermons like this and we'll think about others, but I'm challenging you to think about yourself. Do you really believe all this, right? Do we really believe that Jesus is the reflection of God? Because the answer to these questions from the crowd and from us, right, is the most important decision that we'll ever make. David says the two most important decisions is, are you going to live for Jesus, who you're going to marry, right? Those are the two. And so the next time that they see him, listen, the next time the crowd see Jesus, he's going to be a prisoner, right? He's going to be beaten, and he's going to be a robe and a crown put on him to mock him. And so this is the last time that these words are being spoken, right? And they are being forced to make a decision, because the next time Jesus is going to be on trial. And what do they use against Jesus? His words, right? The very things that he's spoken are the words that will be sifted as evidence against him, right? They're going to use the very, are you the Son of God, right? They're going to use Jesus's words against him. But the real trial is already underway, because again, Rome is not the real villain, right? Pontius Pilate and all of them are not the real villains. Jesus is staring into the darkness, and the darkness is staring back, okay? And everyone who is confronted with these truths in chapter 12, so whether you're living in Jesus' day or you're living right now, ever how you become confronted with, is Jesus the Son of God? Is he a reflection of the true God? Is he only speaking the words that Jesus said? Sooner or later, you're going to have to make up your mind which side you're on, and eventually you're going to be judged by what you heard, right? By the very words that were spoken to you. All right, we're going to move on to chapter 13. Final words. How many of you have been with somebody who was dying? Yours. Okay. Final words are powerful things, right? What do people often do on their deathbeds?
Right.
They apologize. They try to reconcile things that were wrong, or they give you advice, right? They talk about their lives. As the hour of Jesus's passion is approaching, he is taking the opportunity to withdraw from the crowd, right? To spend an evening with just his disciples. Why? Because he knew they weren't ready for what was to come. He knew they were unprepared for the difficult and confusing time that they were about to face. Listen, they still, I've said this 100 times during the book of John, but they still expected the Messiah to claim the throne, to overthrow their enemies, and to lead Israel to unprecedented power and prosperity. How do I know this? Because John doesn't tell us this, but other gospels do. What were the disciples discussing at this dinner? Who's going to get to sit beside the Lord? Who's going to be the most powerful, right? Who's going to be in authority? They still had it in their mind, right, that he's coming to set up this earthly kingdom.
The Chosen does really good on
I haven't watched it yet. I need to catch up.
Oh, it's good.
I know. And so, listen, but they're still expecting that, right? And to bring the entire world under his dominion. And even though he's predicted his own death, he's predicted his resurrection, his arrest, his trial, his torture, his crucifixion, his burial, his resurrection, and his ascension is going to come as a shock to all of them.
So they didn't believe?
No.
The disciples didn't believe what Jesus said.
No.
And that's what I said. The Chosen really, he keeps telling them over and over in the Chosen.
They just don't get it. I mean, imagine, right? I mean, we wouldn't get it either. I don't stand in judgment because we wouldn't understand. We believe you're the Messiah. You're gonna die. What? You're gonna what? That's not what they have been raised their whole lives to believe, right? They had a vision of the Messiah. Listen, it is a perfect dream turned nightmare for them. That's what's coming. That's what they're walking into. They were living in the best days of their lives, right? Walking with Jesus, living with Jesus. And then all of a sudden this nightmare comes. You know, David mentioned it a couple of weeks ago about Thomas. We call him Doubting Thomas. Thomas was just devastated. They were all devastated, right? They were all, every hope and dream that they had been dashed, right? And they're sitting there devastated. And so as this evening is passing, Jesus begins to speak of life. He begins to speak of ministry on earth. Listen, without him physically there. He's trying to prepare them. I've got to go, right? But there's one coming after me, right? He's preparing them. And they quickly, even though I think they begin to grasp the gravity of the moment, they understand he's talking about death, right? Their troubled hearts were gripped by dread. When Jesus says, pray with me, and they fall asleep, listen, they were exhausted mentally, spiritually, physically. All of their being was exhausted thinking about the things that he was saying. Imagine the worry and the anxiety and the stress that they were under. They're hearing this stuff. They're not understanding this stuff, right? What does that do to you? We just said it. It wears on you, right? It wears on you physically. And so they were gripped. They were troubled. Listen, they didn't want to be left alone in this world, right? They couldn't imagine life without Jesus, right? They had him for 3.5 years now. They couldn't imagine their lives without him. So let's start chapter 13. It says, verse 1, before the Passover celebration. Now, John wants us to understand it is Passover. Mm-hmm. And that's important, okay? Before the Passover celebration, Jesus knew that his hour had come to leave this world and return to his Father. I love this. It says he had loved his disciples during his ministry on earth, and now he loved them to the very end. We're going to talk about those words to the very end in a minute. But this verse, I've said it, is a transition from his public ministry to his private ministry, and most commentators call this his farewell discourse, right? He's bidding his disciples farewell. And we're beginning the slow build to his crucifixion, right? To his resurrection. And so John takes his time. I told y'all chapters 1 through 11 cover like 3 years, right? 3.5 years. 12 through whatever cover a couple of days, right? And so John takes his time. He wants us to know the important details of what went on in these couple of days. In looking both backward. So this verse is looking back at what Jesus has done, right? He loved his disciples during his ministry on earth, but it's also looking forward to what he must do. He's going to love them till the end, and we're going to talk about what the end means, right? John says Jesus loved his own from the beginning to the end. This literally means he loved them to the final goal. He had loved them to completion, to the fullest, all the way to the end, completely, finally, to the uttermost, unto death. That's what, and so that word that's used there is the Greek word telos, which is actually the same Greek word that Jesus uses when it's the root word of when he says it is finished on the cross, same word. So when he's saying, I loved you completely, I loved you to the end, he loved us fully, he's thinking about the cross, okay? It is finished. My notes are all over the place, so y'all have to bear with me. I gotta find where I'm going. All right. He is going to complete their training during this time, right? During this final evening, he would review their most important lessons, right? He's going over what they need to remember, right? He's revealing their immediate future. He's preparing them for the days that are ahead, right? And John wants to make it clear that we know that it's Passover time. Why? Because there will be a clear connection between the Passover lamb and Jesus, right? That the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. John wants us to know when he mentions a Jewish festival, the Jewish festival was important to them, but Jesus is applying it to himself. He's saying, I am the Passover now, right? I'm the Lamb of God that's going to take away the sins of the world. Passover was considered one of their greatest festivals, right? It was the time that they remembered, right? When they were delivered from bondage. And so we have seen Jesus at 2 prior Passovers, okay? We've been with Jesus during 2 previous Passovers. In chapter 2, he spoke at the temple during Passover, and he spoke about the temple being destroyed and rebuilt. And what was he talking about? He was talking about his own body, right? And then in the next Passover, in chapter 6, what does he do? He feeds the crowds, right? He multiplies the food, and then he begins to tell them, you've got to eat my body, drink my blood. What happens? The crowds leave, right? And now he's back in Jerusalem for his final Passover, okay? From this point on, listen, Passover will not be as significant as it was. Why? Because we're no longer going to have to recall the lamb on the blood on doorposts, right? We're going to have to recall the blood of the lamb poured out for the world, right? And so I don't have a problem with people that celebrate Jewish festivals and they still do all that. I think it's fine. I think it's our history. I think our religion, what we believe, was built on that. But we're not bound to that. We're bound to Jesus, right? He was the blood. He is the blood of the lamb poured out for the forgiveness of sins of whosoever will, right? And so the Last Supper, celebrated by the Lord with his disciples, he transitions the elements from Passover to what we now call the Lord's Supper, right? And so it's no longer about using the elements to celebrate the Passover. We're using the elements to celebrate his body and his blood. He says, do this in remembrance, or do this to remember me, right? And so there's a shift here. This is love, right? This is the love that Jesus is grounded in something that's still to come. It's grounded in the cross, but this is not an abstract declaration. Jesus is not just saying, I love them to the end. John's not just saying he loved us till the end. He's saying he loved us to the cross, right? And the cross is the ultimate declaration, the epitome of that love, the death of God, the Son, for the world. If you'll remember back, in this verse, he calls him that he loved his own. John actually says that in verse 111. He says he came to his own, and even they what? Rejected him. And so when his own people didn't know him, when they refused him, when they rejected him, he was still loving them. He still loves them, right? For God so loved the world, right? He loves us even in our sin, right? He loves us even when we're wrong. And so this is an act of supreme love. How many of you remember back in John chapter 10, we talked about the good shepherd? How does a good shepherd show his love? He lays down his what? His life for his sheep. So the shepherd loves his own sheep, and they love him in return. And the greatest thing the shepherd can do for them is to lay down his life. That is loving them to the uttermost, okay? He's loving them till the very end. All right, let's keep going. Verse 2, it says, during supper, so they're reclining at dinner, right? It says, when the devil had already put it into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come from God and was going back to God, rose from supper, he laid aside his outer garments, and taking a towel, tied it around his waist. Now, I was going to try to get through like verse 11. I'm only going to get probably through 6. Verse 2 through 4 is one long run-on sentence. All you English majors, in the original, it's just this one continuous long sentence, right? And it reveals something that it says the devil put it into the heart of Judas to betray him. Now listen, Luke lets us know in verse 22 that Judas had already determined to betray the Lord before the dinner. So while he's at the dinner, he's already determined in his heart, or he's already spoken to some officials. I think Luke makes it that he's already got the money. Okay, so this plan is already in place, right? He had already received their money. He was looking for a good opportunity to hand Jesus over to the temple authorities. Listen, this dinner, like we see paintings of it, and like I have to watch The Chosen because I'm curious.
I'm telling you.
But this dinner involves the active presence of the devil. Okay, so yes, Jesus is there and his 11 disciples, but the devil is there too. Okay, and John describes it as him entering into the heart of Judas for the purpose of instigating the betrayal of Jesus. So who gave Judas the idea? The devil. But who had to go along with it? Judas. Okay? The devil had made up his mind on the matter, but Judas is going to fulfill the devil's purpose. Listen, the devil made me do it. I mean, he might give us the idea, but we have to think about it, stew on it, make a decision, decide we're going to do it, right? Yes, the devil can give us thoughts. David's brought it up. I've brought it up before. Y'all ever had that weird random thought in your head and you're like, where did that come from? Right? The devil, right? He will give us these random thoughts, these random things. But think about this. Jesus is sitting here trying to pour out his heart, knowing he's going to die. He's pouring out his heart to his disciples and knowing that the enemy is sitting at the table. Right? The devil is there. The darkness. Not just any darkness, the darkness, right? It is no longer, listen, there are unseen forces at work here, and it is no longer just people that are opposing Jesus. It is all of the satanic powers of the world are coming against Jesus at this moment. This is spiritual warfare. You broke your fingernail, you got a flat tire. That ain't spiritual warfare. Okay? That's life. Life be lifing. We like to call everything the devil. That's not it. Right? Jesus is sitting at a table with somebody he knows is about to go sell him to be killed. Right? The enemy is there. Listen, notice Judas he allowed the devil's whispered suggestion to gain a foothold in his mind. Okay? The devil just came. It's kind of like Eve, right? It's just like, well, I'm sure it didn't sound all that nefarious when Judas first started thinking about it. Right? At the very moment when love, listen, I want y'all to understand, this is the very moment when love is about to be displayed to its fullest. At the very moment when love is going to the very limit, that love is being betrayed. Okay? And 3 things come into view: the table, the towel, and the traitor. Okay? So they're sitting at the table. We're going to talk about this towel that Jesus gets up and he wraps around himself. He literally takes on not just any servant, the lowest servant. They were nothing. The people that had to wash the feet were the lowest of the lowest. They were considered absolutely nothing to society. And Jesus takes on that role and wraps a towel around him. And it's not even the time that you would normally be washing feet. It's in the middle of dinner, right? It's kind of weird. Lord, what you doing, right? The table, the towel, the traitor. Jesus, we have to understand something. Listen. Jesus, and so it says, so all this is going on, right? Darkness, he's facing the devil, he's facing the traitor, he's facing the enemy. And then verse 13 says, Jesus, knowing that the Father has given all things into his hands, and that he had come from God and was going to God. So what are we talking about? Jesus was not surprised by the cosmic battle, okay? He was not surprised by the enemy. I don't even think he was threatened to the extent that he knew that he was going to overcome, but he also knew what he had to go through to get there, okay? And so Jesus knew that God had given all things into his hands. I love this little quote I wrote down. It says, God is not loving, but powerless. He's also not powerful, but unloving. He is simultaneously both. He is both powerful and loving, right? And so God is the perfection of love and power made manifest in Jesus, especially as the cross approaches, because with all the power that he has and all the love that he has in the face of an enemy that is out to kill him, what does he decide to do? Become a servant. That's not what men do. That's not what we do when we get power. We get power and that goes to our head. Y'all ever had a boss, right? Get a promotion. It all goes to their head, right? They're crazy with power. Jesus has all the power and says, I'm going to take on the identity of a slave. I'm going to take on the identity of a servant, and I'm going to humble myself to wash their feet. Okay? Jesus was in complete control of this situation.
Oh, yeah.
Always was, still is. He was perfectly, I love this, Jesus was perfectly in touch with the will and timing of his Father. Nothing is surprising him. Because what did he keep saying over and over? It's not my time yet. It's not my time yet. The hour hadn't come. The hour hadn't come. Now he says the hour's come. So he's perfectly in tune with the Father. Y'all ever been there in your spiritual life? You feel in tune with the Father? I think oftentimes, right, we spend a lot of time not in tune. But all of this, even the conflict still to come, he knows was part of God's plan. Like, he knows this is the Lord's plan, right? Judas is part of the plan. And so, from whom and to whom the Son moves as he fulfills the mission of God. Listen, Jesus knew he was about to endure great suffering. He knew he was about to die. He knew he was about to rise from the grave. And then he knew he was going to receive glory as the ruler of all creation. The Word who was with God, the Word who was God, became flesh. He laid aside the clothes of glory and put on not just human nature, he also puts on human clothes that signify that he's a slave, right? That he's a servant. To do what? To wash the disciples' feet, to wash our feet. Listen, he had come from God and was going to God. And so what does it say in verse 4? It says, he rose from supper, he laid aside his outer garments, and taking a towel, tied it around his waist. Then he poured water into the basin and began to wash the feet of his disciples and dry them with a towel which was wrapped around him. And so despite Jesus knowing all of that, so he knows the enemy's at his table, he knows that he has all power and all authority, he knows the story, right? He knows how this is going to play out. What does he choose to do in the middle of that? It says he slips away from the table and trades his robes for the attire of a slave. But not just any slave, the lowest rank of slave. A slave who washes road grime from the feet of house guests. When a host family invited someone to dine in their home, so if they're having a dinner party, okay, they would station a servant by the door with a basin, a pitcher, and a towel. And as each guest arrived, the servant had to remove their sandals, rinse their feet, and then wipe away the dirt and water with a clean towel. Listen, this was the most demeaning task in the house, right? And so, culturally, this was unheard of that a leader would humble himself and wash the feet of anybody. Jesus is there and we're going to talk about what's the motivation behind Peter's comments, right? We'll get there, but I'm not getting there today, but we'll get there. But listen, there's a book that says Jesus's actions remain unparalleled in ancient literature. No other master or superior condescends to do this for a subordinate. There's no other story from this time where a leader would humble himself and wash the feet of his disciples. He is violating social customs to such a degree that there's nothing to compare it to. There's no other story to say, oh, well, they did this. No, Jesus is the only one who did this, right? And listen, what is he trying to do? He's trying to prepare them for the horrific paradox of the cross that is to come, right? He's going to be humbled. He's going to be naked, right? He's going to be hanging naked for the world to see. And so, again, let's talk about it. Jesus washed the feet of the disciples. How many? All of them. Including who? Judas, right? Judas is literally the hand of Satan. We just said it. He's going to do what the devil has bid him to do. He is directly opposing Jesus. He is facilitating his death. And in verse 4, John mentions again, so he repeats it. He says he gets up, he wraps a towel around him. Then he tells us again that he was wearing servant's garments. What? To emphasize the radical posture of Jesus toward his disciples and the radical nature of his gospel for the world. He's humbling himself. Listen, humility is a lost It's a lost art. We don't like to humble ourselves. The one we're supposed to be like, right? We talked about it last week. Christian means what? Means Christ-like. The one that we are supposed to model ourselves after was the most humble man on the earth, right? And so Luke 22, again, I brought this up earlier, tells us that the disciples have been quarreling over who would have the most prominent positions in the Lord's new government. This is the day before he dies. It's the eve of his crucifixion. And they still expect Jesus to topple Rome and establish a new monarchy so they can get promoted. But Jesus came to establish a new kind of kingdom, right? And in the kingdom of God, you get greater authority when you humble yourself as a servant. Jesus is showing them, listen, my kingdom is not like the kingdom you're looking for. It's upside down. That's what the Beatitudes, right? The Beatitudes are an upside down kingdom. It doesn't make any sense, right? And so the love and the power of God is here being expressed by Christ in the action that he performs for his disciples in the middle of a meal. This is significant, for in his action, the Passover no longer stays in the past. See, they just had to remember, right? The story of Moses, the story of the Passover lamb, the story. Jesus is saying it's no longer in the past, it's present. It's right now, right? It's an event that is about to come. It's the cross, right? And so if anyone in the room deserved to have their feet washed or to be treated like a king, who was it? Jesus. But they're not thinking about that. What are they thinking about? Where am I going to be sitting in his new kingdom, right? And what position of authority? It's such us. It's such people, right? We have Jesus in our midst, right? Who deserves all the glory and all that. I talked about worship Wednesday night. And there's a verse that it's in the New Testament, y'all. It says, they offer worship with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. And he says it's in vain. Do you know you can bring worship into this church that God looks at and says, that's nothing? That's zero. That's worth nothing. It's in vain. There is not a reverent fear of the Lord. I said it Wednesday night. If we're on our phones when the presence of God is in this room, we're here for 2 hours out of your whole week. If we can't disattach from a phone for 2 hours, we have an idol and we have a problem. Right. If that offends you, I'm sorry. It's the truth. We are here for 2 hours out of the week. This should be reverent. There should be a fear. There should be a holiness. And I said it Wednesday night. I believe we have all walked into walls of churches and brought worship that is vain because our heart was not in it. Our heart was out there. Our heart was thinking about the TV show we're going to watch when we get home, or we're thinking about our next vacation, or we're thinking about our friends, or we're thinking about our spouse, or we're thinking about our kids, or we're thinking about all this stuff. And Jesus, listen, he says, their lips are doing me service, but their heart is far from me, and it's vain. It's worthless. It's not worship. I don't want ever. I told him Wednesday night. David wasn't here, but I feel like I can speak for him. I don't want anything we ever do in the walls of this church, God to look at it and say that's vain. Yeah. Does that not scare us? That should scare us. There should be a holy, reverent fear of the Lord. Reverence for God has to come back into the church. Amen. It's got to come back. Amen. It's got to come back. Listen, and I'm not talking about, don't wear, there's all these things like, don't wear a hat, don't do all this stuff. Listen, I'm just talking about our heart posture toward the Lord. When we walk in, are we prepared to bring a sacrifice of praise? Are we prepared to bring him all the worship? Listen, I know, I get it. Life is hard and sometimes it travels in with us. I told him, take a breath in your car a minute before you walk in and prepare your heart. Prepare your heart to bring him something. That's what we're here for. We're not here to see what everybody's wearing. We're not here to talk about what's going on. Listen, all that's great. There's a time for that. There's a place for that. But this is really about him. And so the disciples, what am I saying? The disciples are sitting here with the Son of God. And he is humbling himself to wash their feet while they're thinking about loftier positions in the kingdom. What a God. What a God, right? What a God that we serve. And so he took it upon himself. If anyone was worthy of devotion, it was Jesus. Yet he took it upon himself to become the servant of all. Just as God became a man, the king became a servant. So God became flesh, dwelt among us, right? The king humbles himself and becomes a servant. And so let's talk about feet washing for just a minute, because not many churches do this anymore, right? I was actually reading one of the commentators that I read. He's from England. N.T. Wright, and he was talking about he became a member of a church where once a year during one of the festivals, all of the leaders wash the feet of 12 other people. So they basically reenact this. And he said, I had never done that before. I had never washed feet before. And he said, he was talking about how humbling it was, and how to humble ourselves, right? And to think about what the Lord was thinking about. Listen, foot washing was not just about the servant. So we talked about the poor servant, right? They don't have a place in society. Nobody looks at them as worth anything. But it was also communicating something about the recipient, right? The people in the house were saying, I value you, right? I want to wash your feet, right? It was done as a hospitality, right? It was done so they didn't have dirty feet, because y'all know they didn't sit at like a normal table like we sit at, right? They like reclined at these low seating tables. Their feet would have been like McKinley would have loved it. Let's just say that, because she loves feet, you know what I'm saying? But feet would have been visible. Feet would have been seen, right? And so it was a hospitality. It was a preparation. It was preparing them for a specific task, experience. If they're coming to their house for dinner, it was preparing them for the experience of dinner, right? Or relationship. When Jesus washes his disciples' feet, he is not simply enacting for them who he is, he's telling them who they are. He's saying, listen, I am preparing you for a specific task, a specific experience, a specific relationship that you are about to begin by means of his death and resurrection, the ultimate act of service. The foot washing and the crucifixion was Jesus's way of showing who God was and who God is, that God himself would humble himself and take on condescend. That's a commentary word for y'all. He condescended to become a servant. He condescended to become the lowest of the lowest.
The Bible says for us to condescend to men of low estate.
Yes,
that's something Paul said.
Yeah, because that's what our Lord does, right? And so what he does, we're supposed to do. We think too highly of ourselves. We think way too highly of ourselves. The next time he has his clothes changed, it will be a purple robe in chapter 19. And they're mocking him, right? They're calling him, you're the King of Kings? What? And then after that, he's going to be naked on a cross. So before he's mocked, before he's placed in a purple robe, before he's stripped naked, he doesn't put on robes of authority. He doesn't take a place of position and power. He humbles himself to wash the feet of his disciples, revealing the Father's heart. Listen, foot washing is significant. The community is first being cleansed through the foot washing. So he's cleansing the disciples. He's preparing them for what's to come. And then figuratively, they'll be cleansed through the removal of Judas from their community. But I want to talk about really quick. I put this at the end. That word telos, where it says he loved them till the end. In John 19, when he says it is finished, I don't know how to speak Greek. So y'all have to tetelestai, I guess. And it means paid in full. And so I love this because, you know, a lot of us around here listen to Damon Thompson, and he did a series for years and years and years about beloved identity. Knowing that we're beloved by God, right? Knowing who we are in Christ, that we are loved. And then now Francis Chan is basically doing the same exact thing. He's preaching about beloved. He's talking about being beloved by God. And so I wrote this down out of one of the commentaries that I read. It said, do you realize that you are a beloved disciple of Jesus? His personal possession. Listen, you don't belong to yourself anymore. You belong to him. And that's all. This is symbolic in this foot washing, right? That's the proper perspective biblically of a Christian, that we are no longer our own. Paul said, it's not I who live, but what? But Christ who lives in me. I've been crucified with Christ, right? And so our natural selves fight all of this. We fight being humble. We fight realizing we're beloved. Why? Because people in the world have told us we're not, right? Earthly fathers, earthly mothers, earthly people, teachers, whatever, have told us we're not beloved, we're not loved, right? And so we fight against this our whole life, our natural desire. Listen, and so what do we want to do? We want to make our own way, right? What if Frankie said, I did it my way, right? We want to do it our way. And so everything within us is why we have to continually renew our minds, right? Take every thought captive to the obedience of who? Of me? No, of Christ, right? I have to, so if we're Judas and this crazy thought comes into our mind, what do we immediately do? We take it captive, right? We make it obedient unto Christ. Listen, God is about to show his agape love, his unconditional, sacrificial love. It is a verb. It's a call for action. The cross is an action, right? That Jesus is going to act out to show the love of the Father. And first he starts with washing feet. And we don't get it because culturally it's not a thing, right? It's culturally not, we don't still do it, right? And so to us it's weird. Like, why are we talking about feet washing, right? When my daddy was pastor, if you show up on a New Year's Eve service, you're going to be washing some people's feet, okay? I think we need to do it again. But why? Because we think too highly of ourselves, right? Listen, love is known. I wrote this down, and I want to see if y'all agree with me. Love is known by the action that it prompts. How do we know people love us? They show us, right? Because if I love something or I love somebody and I never tell them and I never show them, I might know that I love them, but do they know, right? Are they aware that I love them? No, because love is shown through action. Now listen, everybody loves differently and everybody acts differently. You know, I tell people all the time, my daughter's not going to let me love on her and hug her unless she's sick. If she's sick, then she'll come rest her head on me. But she's just not a touchy-feely person. But listen, I show her love, she shows me love, right? It's different. And so love is known by the action it prompts. God's love is going to be seen in Jesus. How? By him laying down his life, right? By him giving his life on the cross. By him washing the disciples' feet. So my question to end for us is, what does your love look like? For God? For your family? For strangers? For the people that get on your nerves, right? For your coworkers, right? For all of those people. Christian love is the fruit of his Spirit. Like, we can't love people the way that Christ wants us to love people in and of ourselves. We can only do it through the power of the Holy Spirit. We don't have the ability to love people well outside of Christ, right? This forgiveness, this him washing Judas's feet, that ain't a normal reaction. If I know somebody sitting at the dinner table that's trying to kill me, I might have a fleshly reaction, but the Lord humbles himself and what? And shows love to Judas, right? I don't know. Could Judas have got out of it at this point? I don't know. Those are questions we can ask God one day when we sit down with him. Yeah. But listen, love people well this week. I'm gonna challenge you. Humble yourself, right? Pray about humility. Pray about your worship. Pray about come in with a heart of gratitude. And let's show love, right? Let's show love to the world around us. Anybody want to share anything? I know I didn't really take a breath there. Good. All right, we'll keep going next week.
Just like in the Lord's Prayer when he said, "Not my will, but
yeah, that's it. That's it. That's it. That's a hard thing to pray sometimes. It is.